If you spend hours playing WWE 2K GM mode, drafting your roster, managing your budget, building your shows, trying to increase your popularity, and figuring out which matches are going to get the biggest reaction, then I think I might have found a wrestler game you need to know about. Because there's another wrestling game where you don't just book wrestling shows, you actually run a wrestling company, and it's called Total Extreme Wrestling 9. Now, before you go any further, this isn't a video about why W2K is bad. Far from it. If you love WWE 2K GM mode, that's exactly why I'm making this video. Because of a lot of things you already enjoy in GM mode, TEW takes it much, much further. If you've never played TEW before, the easiest way I can describe it is this. WWE 2K GM mode lets you take on the role of a general manager and manage your brand. TEW 9 lets you step into the world running a wrestling company. You're hiring and releasing workers, managing your roster, booking shows, managing finances, creating and managing titles, building storylines, developing talent, managing your backstage environment, and of course, booking actual wrestling. But here's where TEW starts to get really interesting, because the game isn't simply asking, what matches do you want to book? It's asking you to think about the factors surrounding those decisions, and then see how your show performs. And there's another thing that makes TEW particularly interesting for wrestling fans. The game comes with its own fictional wrestling world, the CornellVerse. The CornellVerse has developed a pretty dedicated following of its own. It isn't just a collection of random fictional wrestlers, it's a fictional wrestling universe with its own companies, workers, history, and wrestling landscape. But if fictional wrestling isn't your thing, the modding community is where things get really interesting. Dedicated TEW mod makers creating databases around real-world wrestling and different eras. So depending on the databases available, you can find worlds inspired by wrestling from the 1980s, the 90s, 2000s, and modern eras. You can create a particular period of wrestling history, or create your own version of it. And you're certainly not limited to just playing as WWE. You can find databases covering everything from major international promotions to smaller independent companies. So you could run a huge wrestling company, take over an established promotion, or start with a smaller company and try to build your company into something bigger. That's one of the things I love about TEW. You're not locked into one way of experiencing wrestling. If you come from GM mode, a lot of that will feel familiar. Let's start with something you already understand. Popularity. If you played WWE 2K GM mode, you already understand the basic idea. Some wrestlers are bigger stars than others, and generally, having popular wrestlers is going to help your show. TEW has worker popularity too, but it goes much deeper than simply having one number attached to a wrestler. So instead of simply thinking, this wrestler is popular, you're thinking about, how popular is this wrestler? Where are they popular? And how does that fit into my company? And that starts changing how you build your roster. Then you have momentum. Here's another concept that will be familiar. You've got two wrestlers. Maybe they're both reasonably popular, but one of them is absolutely flying right now, while the other has cooled off. TEW has a dedicated momentum system, and that's important because you're not just looking at who is popular, you're looking at who is moving in the right direction. And this is where TEW starts encouraging you to think more like a wrestling booker. You're not simply selecting the biggest names, you're trying to understand where your wrestlers are in their careers right now. This is where TEW starts to feel different. Let's say you've got a young wrestler. They're not one of your bigger stars, but you've decided, I'm going to make this person a future main eventer. In WWE 2K, you might think, let's give them some wins and build their popularity. In TEW, you're dealing with a much larger collection of systems. How popular are they? How are they performing? What are their skills? What is their intended role? How are you using them? Who are you putting them against? And what kind of show are you trying to create? TEW even has systems for worker roles, including things such as future main eventer, passing the torch, gatekeeper, and developing roles. So the game gives you more ways of thinking about, where does this wrestler fit into my company? And that's a few different mindsets from simply looking at an overall rating. This is one of the areas where I think WWE 2K player might have one of those, wait, really? Moments? In TEW, your company has a product, and your product helps define what your company is trying to be. So you're not just building a roster, you're building a wrestling company with an identity. And that means the type of wrestling you want your company to present can affect how you approach your shows. Suddenly the question isn't simply, what's the best match I can book? It's what's the best match for the company I'm trying to run? That's a huge difference. And this brings us to something that will really interest WWE 2K players. In WWE 2K, you might simply decide Cena versus Orton, that's your match. In TEW, there's a lot more to consider. Who's involved? How popular are they? What are their skills? How long should the match be? What type of match are you booking? What is the match trying to achieve? And then you've got things like match aims. You can tell TEW what you're trying to accomplish with the match. Is you want to work the crowd, lift the crowd, calm the crowd, tell a story, having a technical showcase, create mayhem. And that means you're not asking who should win, you're thinking, what is the match supposed to do for my show? And then there's the crowd. This is another area that TEW gets much deeper. Your crowd isn't just something you watch reacting to your show. You have to think about the flow of the show. You've got a crowd coming into the show, you put on a segment, then another, then another. And what you're doing with those segments can affect the crowd. So imagine you've just had a huge match, the crowd is really hot. Do you immediately follow with another massive match, or do you deliberately change the pace? Maybe you want to bring the crowd down before building them back up again. That means the order of the show becomes part of the booking challenge. And that's the sort of thing that makes TEW feel less like I'm putting together a match card and more like I'm producing an entire wrestling show. That is probably the biggest thing I want you to take away from this video. You can make the decision in TEW, run the show, and then look at what happened. You're building a company over time. You're building wrestlers, you're building popularity, and you're building your shows. And you're trying to make the next show bigger than the last one. That is the best part of TEW, I think. Lots of GM mode players are going to understand immediately. So let's make this really simple. WWE 2K GM mode, you manage a roster. TEW 9, you manage a wrestling company. WWE 2K, you manage popularity. TEW 9, you manage worker and a company's popularity, with much more depth around how your wrestling world develops. In WWE 2K, you book matches. TEW 9, you book matches while considering workers' skills, matches construction, show position, crowd management, product, and what they're trying to accomplish. WWE 2K, you build rivalries. TEW 9, you can build storylines and manage how these stories fit into your show and company. WWE 2K, you manage your budget. TEW 9, you're dealing with the company finances, contracts, hiring, and wider costs of running your promotion. You can bring wrestlers in from other companies, or from the free agent pool, or from abroad. WWE 2K, you build your brand. TEW 9, you're building an actual wrestling company. That's the distinction I want to make. I'm not saying one game is automatically better, they're designed around different experiences. So let's imagine the same booking scenario. You've got your champion, and you've got a young wrestler you're trying to turn into your next major star. You want to book champion versus rising star. In WWE 2K, you might look at your roster, decide the match makes sense, and book it, and see how the show performs. In TEW, you might stop and think, how popular are these two? How are they doing right now? Is the challenger ready? What role are they being developed for? What does my product want from this match? How should I structure it? How long should it be? What match aim should I use? Where should it go on the card? How hot is my crowd? And what happens if the match doesn't deliver? That's the difference. You're still booking champion versus rising star, but you're thinking about why you're booking it and what you want it to achieve. And this is where I think TEW becomes incredibly appealing to a wrestling fan, because you understood the basic game. You don't have to stop the world that comes with it. The TEW 9 community has created an enormous ecosystem of databases and mods. Want to play historical era? There are databases built around different periods of wrestling. Want to play modern wrestling? There are databases for that are updated monthly or bi-monthly. Want to run WWE? You can. Want to run another major promotion? You can do that too. Want to take a small independent company and try to turn them into something huge? You can do that, or you can start your own promotion. And that means TEW isn't really just a game where you run WWE. It's a game where you decide what kind of wrestling company you want to run. So, should you stop playing WWE and play TEW instead? No, that's not the point. If you want to control wrestlers and actually play the matches, WWE 2K is built for that. If you love creating your own wrestling universe, WWE 2K can give you that experience. But if the part you love most is building the roster, managing the company, booking the shows, building future stars, creating stories, managing titles, and seeing how your decisions affect the development of your company, then I think TEW9 is absolutely worth looking at. Because I think the simplest way to explain the difference is WWE 2K lets you play wrestling, TEW lets you run wrestling. If you already love the management side of WWE 2K, you might love TEW. There was one thing I need to warn you about. If you open TEW9 for the first time, you might have absolutely no idea what you're looking at, because there are lots of systems. You've got companies, workers, popularity, momentum, products, contracts, finances, storylines, titles, matches, angles, crowds, backstage systems, broadcasting, and a whole lot more. And that's actually why I've started a TEW9 official handbook explain series. The goal is simple. Take the official handbook, take the mechanics, and actually explain what they mean in a normal language. So if you watch the video and think, okay, TEW actually sounds really interesting, don't worry about trying to learn the entire game at once. Start with the basics. And if you're coming from WWE 2K GM mode, I'd actually love to know what you think. Does TEW 9 sound like something you'd play? Does the extra depth sound exciting, or does it look completely overwhelming? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to give TEW 9 a try, I've already started building a complete guide like I mentioned. We're taking the game one mechanic at a time, breaking down what it actually does, and more importantly, how you can use it when you're booking your own company. So if you love the management side of WWE 2K, this might just be the next wrestling game you didn't know you were looking for. And with that, I'll catch you down the road. Bye.